This is a recorded version. New questions can't be taken. If you want to ask the question to the panelist, please join the live session every Saturday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time, or 4:30 p.m. IST India time.
महापंथ यह योग है, सहज श्वेत है धाम, तेज पुंज सत्पुरुष है, तह हंसन विश्राम।
VYGOS is Vihangam Yoga Global Online Satsang, which is scheduled every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Those who would miss to attend the morning session can listen to the broadcast replay on Sunday evening at 4:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. The aim of this forum is to give the entire world an opportunity to learn the ancient science of meditation and benefit from this pious service inspired by Sadguru Sadafal Devji Maharaj, the pioneer of Vihangam Yoga. If you are interested in learning the technique or want to conduct a program at your place, and for any inquiry related to it, please feel free to write to us at info@vihangamyog.org. That is info@vihangamyoga.org.
Jai Sukhdev, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Vihangam Yoga Global Online Satsang. It's been a great pleasure to introduce you all again to this platform. I myself am Abhinav, joining from Sydney, Australia. And for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. For those of you who return once more, thank you for your ongoing support. And we hope that over the next hour, the conversations we have give you something to think about. You know, in the hustle and bustle of daily life, it can be difficult to take a moment to stop and think about some of the concepts which we build our lives upon. And today we have a very interesting discussion ready for you, which is on the victory of good over evil, or the concepts of good and evil. And, you know, as we have gone through life, we have all conceived our own kind of way of thinking through what it means to be good, what it means to be bad, what it means to be on the spectrum of good and evil. And no matter which culture we come from, there is usually some representation, whether it be symbolic or whether it be more deeply socially structured, or in some way it's presented that there is a need for a victory to occur of good over evil. And it raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of kind of tangential thoughts around how have we arrived at these definitions? Why is it that our forefathers and our foremothers have talked about the victory of good over evil? What does it represent for us in the modern day and modern world? So this is a super interesting topic, and today, equipped with our global panel, we'll be diving into this, and of course through the lens of the ancient science of spirituality, the science of Vihangam Yoga. So I'll be extending a warm welcome to our panel as we go through the session. We'll be joined by Rishiji from India, Sonuji from Nepal, and Raghavji from India, who will be kind of walking me through some of these concepts and helping me understand and helping us understand how we can think about them. So before we begin our journey, we first start with the welcoming prayers, the Swagat and Mangal Gan. These are offered in the feet of the master of Vihangam Yoga, Sadguru Sadafal Devji Maharaj. Let's invoke the blessings of the master on this auspicious occasion and proceed toward our conversation and our discussion for the day.
आज स्वागत नित्य गुरुवर संत शुभागम आइए, अध्यात्म विद्या दिव्य ज्योति सोमरस बरसाइए। दोष दुर्गुण दूर करके शुद्ध हंस बनाइए। भेद गम गति ज्ञान गर्जन शक्ति द्वार हटाइए। खुले द्वारा शब्द सागर भक्त जन अनहवाइए। जन सदा फल विश्व शिक्षक शान आन बचाइए। शान आन बचाइए। विश्व शांति नाम मंगल परम गुरु को ध्याइए। वर्ग द्वंद्व शांति दूर कर भाव भेद मिटाइए। सार्वभौम समष्टि सत्ता त्यात्मराज बनाइए। वेश भाषा भाव जगमय ज्ञान पर दर्शाइए। समृद्धि सुख शांति धरातल स्वर्ग भूमि बनाइए। विश्व शिक्षक जन सदा फल नीतीश्वर अपनाइए। नीतीश्वर अपनाइए।
Thank you for that beautiful composition. With the blessings of the Master, we're now equipped to dive further into our topic for the day, the victory of good over evil. And as you're kind of thinking through what this really means, what it means to you, what questions you may have, please do share them with us. As always, this platform is an engagement between you wonderful listeners and ourselves. We're trying to navigate these questions and thoughts. So you can reach us on WhatsApp on the number coming on your screen just now, as well as slido.com/VYGOS. So as we kind of dive further into this topic, we now move towards the Svartved recitation. And the Svartved, for those of you who have not had the chance to interact with it before, is a set of divine verses composed by the Master of Vihangam Yoga, Sadguru Sadafal Devji Maharaj. It's a distillation of his own journey on the spiritual path, where he had many questions, many milestones which he wanted to achieve. And then finally, he achieved the ultimate of spiritual science. And his crystallization of that journey in the Svartved is something which gives all of us a lot of wisdom as we approach our own lives and we approach our own paths and try to direct our spiritual growth. So I'll ask now Rishiji from India to take us through some verses and explain them to us in the context of the victory of good over evil.
Welcome everyone to today's Global Satsang. I'll start with verses from Svarveda. मम सद्गुरु आदेश है सत्य करो उपदेश भला बुरा जग मानहि संत चले निज देश. Sadguru states that the eternal Sadguru has instructed him to preach Vihangam Yoga to all humankind. Only human can realize God, and it should be preached to spiritually inquisitive people. While following the true path, difficulties are faced by souls, individuals, but it is recommended that one should not deviate from spiritual path. The true saints, spiritual seekers, take shelter of their spiritual master of Vihangam Yoga and achieve the salvation. The true master of Brahm Vidya can only help in achieving the salvation and the complete perfect knowledge. झूठ साच कैसे मिले अंतर भूमि आकाश प्रवृत्ति भूमि का खेल है, अनुभव खेल आकाश. There is a great difference between the earth and sky. Earth represents nature and is constrained by body, mind, intellect, and speech. Sky represents consciousness, when power of body, mind, intellect, and speech and statement is focused using technique guided by Sadguru, the spiritual master, then we can experience mysterious powers, energy. प्राकृत दुर्गुण नाश है, सद्गुरु शुद्ध विकास. साधन सरल उपाय से, ताहि कहत अभ्यास. The continuous practice is represented by loss of bad habits and improvement in good character. प्रभु के सुमिरन ध्यान से, निर्मल होए सब अंग. आत्म अंतःकरण से, चढ़ता निर्मल रंग. Constant meditation prayer leads to opening of 10th door, wherein there is a constant flow of energy. The flow results into purification of mind, body, and soul. Soul starts holding supreme power and there is not impacted by worldly affairs. विश्व विजय रणधीर हो, जो मन जीता जाए. परम शत्रु मन जीव का, मरि मरि उठत धाए. The entire world is within mind. It is the mind which causes good and bad activities and results into happiness, pleasure, sadness of soul. Only people who have controlled and have conquered mind win this world. The uncontrolled mind is the biggest enemy of the soul. The whole life is passing with the subjects as focus of entire life. This is the prime reason for entire misery, lack of peace, happiness. The mind is so strong that even after controlling it, it tries to engage time and again with subjects. The only way to control mind is constant practice of Vihangam Yoga under guidance of spiritual master of Vihangam Yoga. रणवीर की वीरता, सती देख अनुराग. योगाभ्यास के रूप में होए देह मन त्याग. One can succeed in yoga by sacrificing the happiness derived from subject. सटखत 21 सहस हो, अजपा निश दिन हो जोए. श्वासो श्वास अभ्यास में, पलक न धोखा होए. मन सवार पल पल रहो, कसिए विचार लगाम. छूटी भागी बहु दूर चले, फेरी तेही लायो काम. Everyone breathes about 21,600 times. And all sounds such as Niranjan, Om, Soham, Raram, power is automatically happening. Every moment should be spent on sadhana, constant practice. Many people imagine these powerful and magical words. The only way to experience this word is to control the thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rishiji. Just a bit of technical difficulty at the end there. So as Rishiji kind of took us through, there's so many different concepts which are spoken about in the practical philosophy of Vihangam Yoga, which kind of lean us really well into setting the groundwork for our conversation today. We heard a bit about the mind and soul. We heard about bad habits, the need to develop good character. We heard about the concepts of being limited and being limitless, and also about how we have limited time on this planet. But arguably, the main point, one of the, let's say, primary points we heard, which really brings us to where we are today, is the need to be spiritually inquisitive. And that really represents the journey we're going on today as well. Without being inquisitive, we cannot go towards the depths of understanding the concepts, the principles, and the behaviors which define, let's say, what it means to be good or evil. So I want to thank Rishiji again for sharing those verses with us. The Swadhyaya encompasses the very depths of spirituality, and we're very lucky to have heard those verses. So thank you, Rishiji. And as always, as you're thinking through these concepts, if you have any questions or thoughts to share, we have 2 avenues available, Slido and WhatsApp, as I mentioned earlier. If you just keep an eye on the screen right now, there's a WhatsApp number, and the Slido link will be coming up straight after, slido.com/VYGOS. So now we move towards a short bhajan from Sonuji in Nepal. And once we have kind of taken in the vibes, the vibrations and the thoughts of this bhajan, we'll move toward our conversation for the day on this very topic. So I'll hand over to Sonuji from Nepal, after which we'll have our conversation for the day, where we'll engage with you wonderful listeners. So Sonuji, handing over to you. Looks like we're having some difficulties in hearing him. Sonuji, can you hear us? All right, so how about let's take the bhajan for a little later. So Sonuji, sorry to do this, but I'll ask you to perhaps just hold off for a few minutes and we'll go back to the bhajan near the end of our session. So with that, I'll actually introduce Raghavji to the platform. So Raghavji is working from India, Delhi. He's an associate director at Bridge for India, which is doing a lot of awesome work in the renewable energy space. And he's also, of course, a very dedicated seeker, aspirant of the knowledge of Vihangam Yoga. So he has a lot of very interesting experiences, thoughts, which he can share with us today on this very topic. So I wanted to firstly welcome Raghavji. I hope you can hear me, Raghavji.
Yes, I can, Abhinavji. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yes. So today we've got a super interesting topic of the victory of good over evil. And as I kind of touched on at the very start, and, we all kind of have experienced through life, no matter where we come from, which culture we're from, good and evil is represented in some way. And, the victory of good over evil is important to many in all cultures. And I was wondering, before we kind of dive into that, if we could kind of lay some groundwork on, for our conversation on this, how do we define what is good? How do we define what is evil? What does the spiritual philosophy have to say about these two terms? Is there a way to arrive at an objective definition for these? Is it possible, or are we all going to proceed through life with our own definition for these kind of terms? So if you could, Raghavji, I'd love for you to kind of walk us through how you think about, what good means and what evil means.
Oh, absolutely, Abhinavji. So, value-based definitions and those based on normative assumptions. So, normative would be what should the normal be? What is good? What is evil? What's the in-between? Are these discrete entities, or do they flow into each other? And are there gray areas between the black and the whites, so to say? That's the sort of thing that has occupied theological perspectives, informed perspectives, and research and outputs for so many centuries. And we see that even from the time of the most primitive and the earliest organized religions, this has indeed flowed from the Zoroastrian philosophy of how a person should be good, and what are the edicts, what are the principles that a person is supposed to follow. We have the ancient Hindu treatises on the same, which speak of a great supreme power, and that how we can, through our own enlightenment, perhaps gain a better understanding of that supreme power, and that we should be good and that we should shun evil. We have newer religions such as Christianity, where we look at how Christ, where we celebrate on Easter, on the Sunday that is Easter, we celebrate his resurrection, and that shows that even though he was unjustly and cruelly crucified, it was ultimately good that triumphed over evil, and that he, breaking all the laws of nature, could resurrect and show the world the light that is good. Therefore, we see that while good or evil, like you said, does run through religions and cultures, what we do need to understand is really what is good and what is evil. Because culturally, contextual questions are often, the answers can vary from culture to culture. You may have eating habits, you may have social habits that are acceptable in one part of the world but may not be as acceptable in another part of the world. However, as we know, as children learn, and we have learned so often in maths, there's something called the highest common factor, and there's another interesting element called the least common multiple. So when we look at what binds it all together, we see that even though the exact definitions of good over evil, or in a contextual way, if you ask someone, what should I do in a particular situation? The answer is so contextual and depends on the understanding of good over evil in a particular part of the world, in a particular religion or culture. Yet, a certain common thread runs through all of them. So we have to really look at what is the highest common factor that really runs through all of these arguments, and see that it makes sense that there is a universalism of humanity, and good over evil is really, though it is a moral judgment. There are people who say that, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, for example. But what we do understand from the Indian freedom struggle is violence is not really the way, or at least mindless violence surely is not the way to gain your goal. So we unify each other, we work towards things through what Gandhiji had called satyagraha. Yeah, that's the movement towards a truthful movement, a movement based on truth and non-violence. When we follow those basic principles of humanity, we see that there is agreement across cultures, and you would see that even though there were colonial times, there is a case in which Mahatma Gandhi is brought, that time maybe he was not known as the Mahatma, but he is brought into a court on trial for sedition, and the judge stands up. Yes, you can just imagine. The judge is the interpreter of the law, and he reigns supreme in the court, and when Gandhiji walks in, he actually stands up in respect to acknowledge the presence of Gandhiji and what he stands for. And as he stands, I think everyone else in the court does stand the same, and then they sit down, and then the proceedings begin. And at the end of it, even though the judge pronounces a sentence that is based on law, he says that even though he is sentencing Gandhiji to some particular time, perhaps in confinement, he says that he'll be only too happy if this sentence gets waived or it actually doesn't proceed. So the point is that even though the judge represents the colonial nature of the administration, he acknowledges Gandhiji's good work and the values and the principles that he stands for. And therefore, even the judge and other people in the court stand up to acknowledge that in Gandhiji. Hence, good and evil, even if they are contextually different in different cultures, there is always a highest common factor that every human being would appreciate. Over to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, that's a lovely explanation, and I think it really rings true. Like, as as you go through life as well, you interact with people from different places in the world. There is a highest common factor, and it's interesting, that how these principles come about. Arguably, when we look at what it means to be good, a lot of it is to do with how it makes other people around you feel. And I think that's kind of a good maybe point at which we could maybe explore, good behaviors and bad behaviors. They have an effect on the people around us. And if we look at the spiritual philosophy, where we talk about the unit of consciousness, the unit of energy. So I'd love to kind of dive into it with you, Raghavji. Like, how would you reconcile or kind of look at consciousness and energy in the context of good and evil? There's concepts like seva, there's concepts like, the reverse of seva, where you hurt someone, where you cause a negative effect on them. How would you kind of think through the kind of exchange of consciousness and energy when it comes to good and evil?
I would say, so there is this very important and all-encompassing framework that we use in Vihangam Yoga, for example. And Vihangam Yoga, as you just discussed earlier in this particular session and in previous sessions, is a syncretic way of approaching knowledge of the Supreme Being. And it goes via knowledge of the self. So the main thing is, first is Gyan, which means knowledge, true knowledge, to be more precise. And it means that to know something the way it truly is. That is the simplest definition of Gyan. And what does Gyan tell us about good and evil, and how we can be, better, how we can go towards the good and stay away from the evil, would be mainly through the most powerful tool then in this particular framework. I would call it the 4S framework. So the four elements of the 4 S's of the framework are seva, satsang, sadhana, and swadhyay. We shall initiate this particular part of the framework at the seva end, where we see that when we say seva, we mean service, and we actually mean selfless service. So we really mean to serve something or to serve towards a higher goal without expecting a direct quid pro quo in return. So otherwise it would be more like a material transaction, like a business transaction. That if I'm paying so much money, I'm expecting so much, or if I'm working so much, then I'm expecting a certain reward commensurate to my inputs. But if we perform selfless service, what we see is that we are able to discriminate the subtleties of life. When we are doing selfless service, when we put service before the self, our ego gets diminished. And the ego is the part of us that really forms multiple filters and shows us the world through different hues, which may not necessarily reflect reality. So one man's perception of a certain situation would be, I should act in a certain manner, while another man's perception would be to act in a different manner. So one person can react angrily, another person can react peacefully, a third can react rationally, combining a little of the elements of both, but ensuring a positive outcome. How we approach this again is, if we are blindsided by our ego, our own parental tapes, just as we talk about in transactional analysis, memories of the past that have completely that have shaped us and continue to shape our outputs, our viewpoints, we see that if we do selfless service, it creates that positive energy in us. It creates and positive energy in the people around us, because when we are following a principle stand and we are doing selfless service, it inspires other people to do the same. And as we head towards the end of that particular service in that particular area, we see that everyone has moved from where they were to a higher plane. And that higher plane is really what takes us away from the frailties that pull us back into evil, or not just evil. Let's just look at the frailties that cause us to be lazy, it's to be ignorant, to think ill of others. We move away from there because of seva, and we move into a positive zone towards good. Over to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you, Raghavji. That was a great kind of exploration there. And I do think what you're saying is something we all experience as well. You know, like if you have a long day at work or school or university or wherever it is, you spend most of your time and you come home with, let's say, anger in your heart, then immediately there's an exchange of negativity. And, you know, it's probably a bit much to say evil, but it is probably fair to say that a bad energy starts to enter the room. And I think, as you touched on, the philosophy of Vihangam Yoga and spirituality at large, when we look at the topic of victory of good over evil, it really represents the consciousness and the conscious energy we're exuding into the environment, arguably. And I think that kind of brings us to an interesting point where, you know, we've talked about good and evil, the effects it has on people. But arguably, if we look at ancient texts, many of them are symbolic of a deeper kind of journey or a deeper meaning as well. So I'd be interested to hear from you, Raghavji, you know, this whole concept of victory of good over evil, what does it represent about the self? You know, we heard earlier in the Swarved that there is an enemy within us which we have to defeat. So do the ancient texts, would it be fair to say the ancient texts are alluding to this battle which we go on every day? And how is it that we can kind of, you know, succeed in this battle?
Sure. So when we discuss this battle of good and evil, there seems to be, in certain stages, there seems to be a time when evil, the forces of evil, or the forces not just of evil, evil is one polar end, and there are any number of gray areas and dark areas around it, which are essentially ignorance, which are a lack of understanding and communicating to other people what my perception of the situation is, and is it the correct reading, and are we understanding them correctly, which leads to suboptimal outputs. So for example, in a management scenario, if you see in an organizational day-to-day say case, we would see that we have teams fighting against each other, or playing off, or playing games, you know, mental games, or manipulating issues, because they're not in complete communication and they're not working towards the same higher purpose and the objective. So the clarity that really is required is, what is the purpose that we are working for? What is that overall goal that we are working for? And this is the most important part of leadership in management, which ensures that when we are working towards a common objective, we don't go off track by getting diverted in areas that lead us away from the good that we are supposed to, with the good that we're supposed to work towards. So we may be able to materially quantify it. Not every bit of a job is that of, say, Mother Teresa's. Not every bit of a job involves direct seva for the welfare of society, but it plays a small part. If every organization, if everyone does their bit, it adds up to a huge macro part of an energetic consciousness that is positive, that drives society towards betterment, and that moves us from lower, say, GDP to higher GDP. And as we get materially more progressive, we have to take out time to be more spiritually aware, to be connected to the ecology of other living beings, of the ecosystems, of the forests, or the water resources, of earth and wind, and the climate around us. So good is good that is beneficial for the entire universe. There is a universalism to it. We can't plunder resources and say that it is just good because it is only materially good. We should also be guided. There should be a regulatory framework that suggests that we should act in a certain manner and exercise discretion, so that we may understand that when we use up a resource, that it does not affect the balance, the delicate balance that exists in nature, and it ensures that those resources are used adequately and appropriately in a matter for the betterment of not just us, not just private individuals, but everyone as a whole. So this too is part of the larger battle of good over evil, where we look at overcoming our own ignorance and working in unison towards a higher goal, which is driven in a spiritually charged manner, not just religion. So you can see that religion may put up the codes, may put up the definitions. You may be constricted by certain definitions, but if you look at the same religious text in a spiritual way, you interpret it in such a way that is acceptable to not just people of your belief, but to everyone in general. Back to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, like that really does ring true on many levels. And I think as we're kind of talking about the current world and what we need to do as people, we heard in the Swarved about the mind, and we heard in the Swarved about the soul, and arguably in the spiritual philosophy, our higher purpose is aligned with the journey of the soul. And as we kind of engage ourselves in the material world, the mind starts to play, and the principles which we've inscribed into our soul, into ourself, they become difficult to uphold, as you just mentioned and explained to us. And there's a great question here from one of our listeners. In today's world, I see evil wins over good, which is the opposite of what we're discussing today. What is your thought on this? So I think it's a very, very good question, I would say, a very accurate question in that, if we look at the world today, the living conditions of human beings are, on average, much better than hundreds of years ago. But if you flick open the news and you start to look at what's going on around the world, it seems like forces of evil are overcoming forces of good. So what is your thought on this, Raghavji? Like, are we looking at the things in perhaps an inaccurate way? Is there something going on which we don't understand? In some way, is good actually overcoming evil? What is the state of the world, and how do we reconcile that with this spiritual framework?
So most religions actually hold out prophetic interpretations and tellings in the religious texts, and they talk about a time of great upheaval. And it's not just confined to one religion. You will see that this runs across multiple religions. So we have the concept of end of days, and we have in Christianity, and then we have the concept of Kali Yuga in Hinduism. We have similar such strands running through Buddhism. So that particular fight that happens, and which is why this particular fight between the war between good and evil is then celebrated in the forms of festivals that we celebrate across different religions, is to give the margdarshan, or to show the path to humanity, that even though the characters in that particular story, in that particular festival that we are celebrating, look at the immense hardship that they went through. No matter what they were subjected to, no matter what troubles they faced, they stood up true to their values. So the spiritual values, those values that shine through in each particular story, are what really inspires us even today to stand true to our values, to our spiritual values, to our universal values. And you will see that those values embrace every religion, every culture all across the world. So even though today you have times of upheaval, I agree with the person who's asked this question, who's put this question fully, because even materially we are seeing trade wars, and we are seeing a lot of upheaval in the way that nations are dealing with each other, nations are dealing with their own populations. We see that there is a lot of, now that we are all bound in the social frameworks of the internet and all, we see that a lot of things that happen microscopically can get blown out of proportion, because in a few moments everyone across the world is aware of them, and it depends on who's reporting on that particular incident and what his viewpoint is and how he builds up the whole story. Based on that, you can have a cascading effect which completely miscommunicates maybe what happened, the reasons behind it. And to work toward the solution, you really need to have people who are able to discriminate between what is right and wrong, to hold on to the emotions, to look into the truth, to verify the truth, and then maybe put out a rejoinder to make sure that people are not emotionally charged and they take decisions that are essentially good, not just for themselves, but for everybody else. So even though there is a lot of ferment, there is a lot of even intellectual ferment, we see that there are movements that are starting, that are peaceful movements that really want to overcome all of this, that there are messages of brotherhood and universalism. And even though you may be in the war, you may be stuck right in the bang center of the war between good over evil, so long as you stand up for values of truth, of humanity, of compassion, you will ultimately prevail over evil. So that is the message that we get from centuries and centuries of this particular description of battles of good over evil that continue to inspire us today. Back to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you, Raghavji. So, I think it'd be fair to say that, to reach this kind of state of goodness, there has to be a hardening phase. And, in the spiritual path, often the way we navigate through these kind of events is that these kind of, uncomfortable scenarios where, say a force of evil is starting to, put its jaws around you, they offer an opportunity for transformation and an opportunity for furthering your own growth and hardening your alignment between the principles which you aspire towards and the behaviors which you actually bring to the world. So, as Raghavji was talking about that just now, and, kind of related to that, we have another question, which I'll just touch on briefly with you, Raghavji, because I think we just explored it to a certain degree. If people know one is humble, others take advantage of his or her humbleness. How do you see that in terms of good over evil or evil over good. I feel like it all kind of fits into the same framework of it's really just the person who is humble has to be rational and not be emotional. So how would you kind of navigate this one? So Raghavji, I think you're muted, but
My apologies. I just lost a few packets of data here and there.
That's
So
all right.
I got the question, Abhinavji. I think if I recollect correctly, you said that the questioner has asked us that if he is humble, will people take advantage of his humility and maybe ride roughshod over him and take advantage of him? So why should he be humble? Is that correct?
Yeah. That's very much the essence of it. Yeah.
Okay, I think that this has been addressed. It's a wonderful question and one that has occupied my thoughts also while preparing for this particular session. And we see that this has been addressed in various philosophical texts also, where and I could relate to you a particular story. So there is this serpent who has been the serpent is known as a dangerous snake in that particular village where he stays in the farm area, and no one goes close to the serpent because the serpent is known for hissing and biting people to death, etc. So everyone is scared of the serpent and no one goes there. And one day a hermit, a saint, he is passing through the particular area and he encounters the serpent, and because of his divine powers he is able to have a conversation with the serpent, with the snake. And in the conversation it says that the snake is admonished by the saint, and the saint says that you need to come out of this particular stage of the yoni, the form that you have taken, and to move on to a higher form, and you need to stop being so evil and killing people, etc. So he admonishes the snake and he instructs him to be good. So the snake readily agrees because this is a great saint and he has shown the saint the way to be good. So what happens is that the snake becomes a very peaceful snake. He is no longer that reviled serpent, the dangerous serpent that he was. And it so happens that people then see that, oh, here's a snake. Well, you can catch a bit of its tail or you can shove it around and the snake won't do anything. So people in the village would ride roughshod over the snake. They throw stones at it. They nearly killed it. So he remembers the saint again, and the saint appears before him again. And he says, mighty hermit, mighty sage, I've done what you asked me to, and look what situation I am in. People have nearly beaten me to death. And the hermit tells him that I asked you not to bite and kill people, but I did not ask you to stop hissing and to scaring people away. Right? So this particular part is what holds true for most of us who come into situations where we are faced by people who at that particular point of time maybe outwardly violent or maybe seeking to dominate us in a way that is not good for anyone, so to say. So we should not let our guard down. Humility would not mean that we accept everything and are ridden over. We should put a point of view across. We should be assertive. We need not be violent, but we should be assertive once we have clearly and rationally thought things through without getting swayed by emotions. We should seek the wise counsel of other people around us so that we know that what we are thinking has taken into cognizance other people's views. And then we should approach the people who we are dealing with at that point of time and then seek dialogue. If the other person is trying to take advantage of your humility, don't be that humble, but don't be violent, don't be evil. So let's not go from one polar opposite to the other. Let's look at the space in between and seek a place that is closer towards good. But just like the snake was instructed, do not stop making people know that if you are pushed beyond a point, you can be a really bad person to deal with, because then you will not need to be bad, you will not need to be evil by, at any rate. You can just show them that this is what your thinking is, and this is what your viewpoint is, and that if they're trying to take advantage of you, you will not allow that. Therefore, be assertive, but not violent. Over to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great story as well. It really captures a lot of the things we've been talking about. And, as we kind of reach the end of this conversation in the last 5 minutes or so before we move towards the bhajan and the close, I'd love for you to just kind of summarize for us, Raghavji, some of the things we've talked about. We talked about the 4S framework from Vihangam Yoga. We talked about the mind and soul. We talked about, self-awareness and cosmic consciousness. So, concretely, how do you see Vihangam Yoga helps an individual, kind of emerge victorious over the forces of evil within themselves towards the forces of good?
I think you said it, you framed it absolutely correctly, Abhinavji, because evil and the forces of ignorance and darkness, they first and foremost reside in our own selves. And for example, in the philosophy of Jainism, we say that one has to be a jina, a conqueror of oneself first. So it's only when you conquer your own ignorance and the forces of evil that are within you, forces of laziness, ignorance, all those 7 deadly sins that we talk about, it's only when we conquer those that we can move towards a higher plane. However, in Vihangam Yoga, what we see is, it's not that we first need to stop being evil to be good. It's a very complex situation, because there's so many forces at play, and there is so much baggage, intellectual baggage, emotional baggage, and the burden of history that we carry that forces our actions and our thoughts to be in a certain way. The only way to move towards a higher plane is to look at it from the perspective of seva, of selfless service, towards the betterment of society, towards the betterment of the purpose that you're working. The other important part is sadhana. That means meditating regularly as instructed by a spiritual master, to ensure that your body, your physical self, your mental self, and your spiritual self is refined to a point where you keep moving, you keep progressing. And though you may hit roadblocks, you move to places where you were and to better places where you want to be. That particular part, that meditation, is something that you can seek from Vihangam Yoga practitioners anywhere in the world. The third thing in the 4S framework would be swadhyay. It would be satsang. That means the company of good people. So if you seek the company of good people and wise counsel, you shall always be counseled towards righteousness, because one person may be wrong, but collective wisdom often leads to a more truthful and a better outcome. Finally, the fourth one is swadhyay. That means learning. That means education, educating yourself. So keep educating yourself at all times, and stay away from ignorance, work towards your betterment and the betterment of everybody. Thank you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raghavji. I think we've had a super interesting conversation today, and I really thank you for kind of taking us through the different tenets of philosophy, spirituality, religion, and ultimately Vihangam Yoga and how it helps us kind of go through these things. So in the interest of time, I'll quickly hand over to Sonuji. I'll request him to share a quick bhajan with us. He's joining us from Nepal. And after that, we'll do our Shanti part and a summary of what we talked about today. So over to you, Sonuji, and then let's go towards the end of our session.
Thanks a lot, Abhinavji. And it's really great to have this opportunity. So in this bhajan from Shak Prakash, let's hear what Swamiji has written for all of us, where we pray to him that, O Sadgurudev, give us your disciple, your sevak, your divine spiritual powers, energy, and inspiration to spread this knowledge and the spiritual treatise of Vihangam Yoga to whole humanity and succeed in victory of good over evil. हे दया में भक्त वत्सल भक्त निज अवलोकिए चलते धरातल लोक हित जन सब कला से पोखिए शांति माया पर चाल मधुमत दुष्ट जन को रोकिए भक्त सज्जन पाव गम गति जाति मानव पोखिए फल फूल सज्जित बाग उपवन ध्यात्म शोभा देखिए जन सदा फल सत्य व्रत संसार जीवन देखिए हे दया में भक्त वत्सल भक्त निज अवलोकिए. जय श्री सुखदेव.
Thank you so much, Sonuji. Sorry that we only had to fit you in near the end there, but thank you for joining us so much for that bhajan today. Today was a super interesting conversation. For myself, I live in Sydney. I'm very lucky that I get to work with people and interact with people from all over the world, and I consider myself very lucky for that. And in my own experience, I feel like a lot of the things we talked about today, they really resonate. For me personally, and I also think it resonates for everyone today. And we'll kind of look at those things very shortly as we, go through the Shanti part and summarize the very end of our session.
विराग त्याग की शांति हो उदासीनता शांति सेवा जित शिष्य शांति हो सत्य शांति हो शांति हे प्रभु शांति स्वरूप हो शांति शांतिमय शांति 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 जन शांति हो पूर्ण शांतिमय शांति हे प्रभु शांति प्रदान कर दूर हो सर्व अशांति देव सदा फल शांति में शांति शांति सुख शांति हे प्रभु शांति प्रदान कर दूर हो सर्व अशांति देव सदा फल शांति में शांति शांति सुख शांति.
So as I was just kind of reflecting before we shared the Shanti part just now, which very beautifully kind of brings us towards the end, where we're praying for the peace of all humanity and all living beings in every plane of existence. No matter where you go in life, in the world, we interact with people from all over. And, this kind of sense we have of what it means to be good and evil, as Raghavji and the Swarved and, all of our panel today kind of spoke about, there is this universalism present, no matter where you go, even if you don't speak the same language as the person you're speaking to, you'll have vibes and an exchange of energy and consciousness. And in the midst of that, the four principles of Vihangam Yoga, the four S's of Vihangam Yoga become super important. We've got satsang, seva, sadhana, and swadhyay. Probably mispronounced it. But these four things, they really guide us in getting to the meat of it. What are these principles of good and evil? And the meditation of Vihangam Yoga, the practice of Vihangam Yoga, They really give us like a three-phased approach where we become self-aware, we start to apply self-control, and then we start to balance ourselves in accordance to the principles which we are discovering. And one of the beautiful things about Vihangam Yoga, which we kind of looked at today, is that it brings us towards an objective state of understanding these things. Once we're aware of the world we live in, of the ecology, of the consciousness that's flowing around us, and we start to tailor our interactions in a way that's benefiting everyone, then we start to realize, oh, hey, this is what it means to be good. And we start to enact goodness without even caring about the word, because we are that thing. And we become conscious and self-conscious and cosmically conscious of these things. So with that, I'd like to bring today to a close. Thank you for everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. Jai Surudev, and see you next time.